Documentaries can be a great way to jump into a new topic, but they don't often cover the whole story. Tiger King took the world by storm, but for the case of Don Lewis, a lot was left untold. The mysterious circumstances of Don's case have created a lot of speculation among internet sleuths, but what really happened to Don Lewis on that day in 1997?
Hello, listeners. Thank you for tuning back into the Abyss Pod. My name is Hallie.
And I'm Brittany.
And we're excited to talk with you today about the disappearance of Don Lewis. This was a really big topic for us. We got some recommendations about it. And we all know we watched Tiger King, so we just felt like we should dive more into the case itself. Don't forget to follow us, like our podcast, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating, all of that good stuff. So that way we can get your feedback and make sure to continuously update you with new episodes, more information on cases, things like that. Also, we are now starting a Patreon. So if you want to find out more about that, please go to our website, theabysspod.com. You can donate to our podcast every month to kind of help us out. Throughout our episodes, if you want to see some visuals such as pictures or videos, audio links, or do your own research and sleuthing, you can go to our website, theabysspod.com, and find all of that information there. We really want you guys to do that so that way you can see who we're talking about. It makes it more of a real case when you're actually looking at the people who were involved.
So let's jump into the abyss. Jack Donald Lewis, also known as Don, was born April 30th, 1938 in Hillsborough, Florida. His parents were John Lewis and Myrtle Dewey. He had 2 siblings, and the 3 of them were raised by a single mother. In 1955, Don was 17, and he married Gladys Cross, who was just 14 at the time. The 2 had 3 daughters together and adopted a son, but unfortunately, the marriage was plagued by Don's infidelity. He was such a serial cheater that Gladys was well aware of what was going on. She even knew he tended to go for young girls, sometimes even younger than their daughters, and she just kind of accepted it. Don was not well educated, but he was business savvy. He started a business selling scrap. He also acquired 2 pieces of real estate in this time. In 1981, he met the now famous Carole Baskin. Carole grew up in a very religious household. When she was 14 years old, she was the victim of a brutal gang rape. Sadly, because of her family's views, she was blamed for this, and this caused Carole to decide to drop out of school and run away. She spent many years homeless, hitchhiking, sometimes living with men here and there. Finally, at age 18, she got a job as a bookkeeper. Her boss at this job, Michael Murdoch, became enamored with her, and eventually the 2 started living together. To appease Carole's parents, who didn't approve of the couple living together while not being married, they wed in April of 1979. Michael was physically and mentally abusive, and Carole didn't love him but felt trapped and felt like she had to marry him, so she felt like she didn't really have a choice in the matter. The couple had a daughter in 1980, and they started breeding cats. Carole had always loved animals. She had a particular interest in cats, and the breeding helped with money, so she felt like it was a good deal. In May of 1981, Michael and Carole had a really bad fight, and Carole ended up having to flee the house. She walked along Nebraska Avenue, and that's when Don Lewis pulled up beside her. He offered her a ride, but she declined, and he drove on. But a short time later, he pulled up beside her once again and showed her a gun that he had and said that she could point it at him so she felt safe. She decided to accept this ride, and she agreed to spend the night with him. Don offered her pajamas, and the 2 just went to sleep, and Carole felt like he was a really good man because he didn't push sex on her, and he was just sort of helping her out.
I just think it's weird that he whipped out a gun on her. That's a little abnormal, whether he's not pushing sex or not.
Yeah, definitely an odd start to the relationship.
But he also whipped out a gun on himself. That's just a weird situation.
And later, an affair began between Don and Carole. It's important to note here that this was Carole's version of events. There's a lot of speculation around that it didn't really happen like this. A lot of people that live in the area note Nebraska Avenue as a popular spot for prostitution, and I've seen a lot of people casting judgment and making fun of Carole for possibly being involved in sex work. And I really encourage people to have some compassion regardless of how you feel about Carole or the other players involved in this story. Carole was young and abused and traumatized, and even if she was involved with sex work, she was in a desperate situation. She was in an abusive marriage. Some people say that Michael was forcing her into sex work. So there's probably a lot more to the story, and there's a difference between offering factual information and just attacking someone's character. If she did lie about this part of her life, that's not really all that outlandish, and it's pretty much her story to tell or not tell as she wants.
At the time that Dawn and Carole met, it was mentioned in Tiger King that Dawn was already fairly wealthy. Carole refutes this statement, saying that Dawn was actually not rich. The two of them worked together to build a wealthy status rather than just her simply mooching off of his bank account. As we know, it is hard to really trust any specific person in this particular circumstance, but there are no documents that disprove Carole's statements. Dawn and Carole became more than just lovers having a not-so-secret affair. They became business partners. They started a loan shark business, which basically meant they just would talk to people who were struggling financially and buy their loans from them. Then they would provide the people with 6 months to make the payments off with an extremely high interest rate in an effort to purchase their property back from Dawn and Carole. Unfortunately, if they did not do so within the 6-month time frame, they would be evicted from their home and their property would be sold. Over time, Dawn and Carole were able to accumulate 350 properties. This business made them greatly disliked by the community. Dawn specifically was seen as this ruthless businessman who didn't really care for the lives of others or of people in the area. In regards to organizing their funds, there was a trust for the properties that Carole and Dawn had together, and then another that Carole just had on her own. Dawn also had another account that he managed on his own, but he had his kids on it as beneficiaries, and he let Pam, who was a long-term mistress at the time, have access to it. I don't know anybody else, but I would not be married to a man who had a long-term mistress that he would share his bank account with. That's just like an awful scenario. Not acceptable at all. On August 20th, 1990, approximately 9 years after Dawn and Carole met, Carole sent a letter to Gladys, Dawn's wife. Reading this letter felt like a whirlwind of information. Part of it was written by Carole directly for Gladys, while the other part was some sort of manuscript written by Carole, like a journal entry in a way, that she just included into the letter. The entirety of the letter is quite long, but we are going to sum it up for you. Basically, Carole apologizes to Gladys for having an affair with Dawn, saying that she has sinned greatly against God and that she can't take back her actions. She can only improve in the future. She also mentioned another long-term mistress of Dawn's, who we just mentioned, Pam. Carole said Pam was part of a group that was essentially a cult. This group was supposedly messing around with the metaphysics and practiced mind control. In fact, Carole stated that Pam tried to recruit her into this group as well. She then proceeded to explain a long story about her relationships leading into being with Dawn and his relationship with Pam. Carole told Gladys about a man named Roy who helped her get out of her marriage and away from Michael. She grew to care for Roy a lot, and Dawn didn't like this. He didn't like her and Roy being together, so Carole and Dawn's relationship went on and off for a little while. When Dawn was upset, he turned to Pam for comfort, which Pam took advantage of in order to manipulate him in a vulnerable place. She was stated to be a gold digger and overall bad influence. In December of 1986, Carole said that Dawn and her had gotten back together, but she was still seeing Roy and Michael at the time. Lots of sleeping around was happening between these people, and Carole said she had a hard time making a decision and ended up leaving her lovers ultimately to be with Dawn. But Dawn would not stop seeing Pam and another long-term mistress who was his secretary, Jane. I know it's a lot of names, but just to clarify, at the time, Dawn was married to Gladys and having an affair with Pam, Jane, and Carole, because him and Carole weren't married yet. And possibly other women, honestly. If he was sleeping with 3 or 4 women, I'm sure he was sleeping with more. Carole, on the other hand, was married to Michael, but she was having affairs with Dawn and sometimes Roy. So definitely a lot going on and a lot to explain in a letter to Gladys for some reason. But in conclusion, the purpose of the letter was to ask Gladys to save Dawn's soul from Pam. An interesting quote from the letter that we thought we should include was when Carole wrote, quote, "Perhaps I ask too much, but I had to get out of my marriage and would have eventually killed my husband to do it," end quote. This is a really bold statement, and even though this is regarding Michael, it still doesn't look too good for Carole at the moment. Don and Carole both officially divorced their spouses in 1991 in order to be together. Gladys settled for $1 million during the divorce because she wanted things to just be done in her marriage, so that way she could marry another man. Even though most of us would be content with $1 million, Gladys did end up returning for more money. Gladys was ready to move on with her life, but Don was having second thoughts. A week before marrying Carole officially, Don asked Gladys if they could work out their problems, but he was rejected.
Don and Carole decided to officially get married, and Don was supposedly very stingy with money. Even though the couple had built a lucrative business, Don was allegedly prone to dumpster diving for clothes and even food, and allegedly he spent just $14 on Carole's engagement ring.
That needs to be like K more.
On the other hand, he was also known to carry around large wads of cash and sometimes impulsively make large purchases. Don bought Carole a bobcat as a gift, and she was delighted with it. Remember, she loved cats, obviously, and she really wanted to get more into the exotic cat sort of side of things. Later, they decided that this bobcat needed a companion, so they went to a local breeder. When the breeder revealed that all of the kittens that he had were going to be sold for fur, Don and Carole bought all 56 of them. And this really began their dabbling into breeding. In 1992, as Don and Carole started acquiring more exotic cats, they decided to open a wildlife park, and they opened Wildlife on Easy Street. They had about 200 animals, about 120 of them being cats. Carole really loved it, and Don really loved the money coming from it, so it worked out. Don wanted to breed the cats for cash, but Carole wasn't as keen on this. So when Don was out of town, she would spay and neuter some of the cats to thwart the breeding and kind of go behind his back with that. Don was away quite a bit in Costa Rica. He conducted business there and would make frequent trips. Florida was a well-known hotspot for drug running in the 70s and 80s and 90s, so it's possible Don was involved in that, but overall it's unknown if he was connected to that sort of world. Once again, Don had no interest in fidelity and had several affairs. He would even allegedly time his trips to Costa Rica around Carole's period, so he could visit with one of his mistress, so he never missed a chunk of time there. Carole considered Don addicted to sex, and just like Gladys, she kind of brushed off his affairs, and I'm sure it upset her, but she didn't really make a huge deal about it. Don talked a lot about Costa Rica. He wanted to move the wildlife park there. He wanted to move there full time. He loved it there. He had business dealings there. He had a mistress there. So he was pretty much set to move there full time. But he also talked about how dangerous it was. He told Carole that people went missing there a lot, especially when they were connected to organized crime, which Don allegedly was loaning money to the Helicopter Brothers, which were like the mafia in Costa Rica. So he was allegedly pretty involved in the organized crime there, so definitely put him at risk.
Over time, Carole became more and more concerned that Don's mental state was declining due to some of his strange behaviors. At the time, she was not informed about Alzheimer's, but someone else mentioned it to her as a possibility. Carole was worried about Don and recommended that he go see a specialist to address the issue. However, Anne McQueen, who was Don's long-term assistant at the time, and we're going to be talking a lot about her, so Anne McQueen was a pretty vital person in this case. She convinced Don that he needed to go see a psychiatrist instead. He listened to McQueen, which is interesting that he would listen to his assistant rather than his wife, but he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. After being diagnosed, Don was quickly taken advantage of for his money. For example, Wendell Williams, a friend of Don's, used his disorder to scam him out of tens of thousands of dollars. In 1996, 5 years after Don and Gladys got divorced, Gladys sued him after discovering that he was hiding money under different names to decrease the amount of money she actually would have received during the divorce. So it went back to court, and Don really thought that his 3 daughters, Donna, Linda, and Gail, would support him. But on the contrary, they testified with their mother. Gladys won $148,000 and Don was livid. He decided that he was going to cut Gladys and his children completely out of his will. However, Carole did not follow through with the task because she believed that Don would end up regretting his actions later. At the beginning of 1997, in January, Don's assistant Anne McQueen stated that Don was contemplating divorcing Carole. To get his belongings in order, he started transferring some of this stuff to a company he controlled in Costa Rica with McQueen's help. Obviously, he had already talked about wanting to move to Costa Rica, so if he was planning a divorce, it doesn't seem far-fetched that he would start shipping his stuff down there. Anne McQueen was very supportive of all of Don's actions, even to the extent of covering up his affairs. Supposedly, she also received money from his life insurance and was a very close confidant. McQueen was proud to say that she was the only woman Don did not hit on, but many people, including myself, speculate that this is a lie because he hit on everybody. So most people think that they actually were having an affair and she just didn't want to say it because he was sleeping around and she was also married, so it would have come bad on her and her family. So it doesn't surprise anybody that she would lie just like anybody else in this case. Unfortunately, Don seemed to have misplaced his trust in Anne McQueen. On January 26, McQueen was caught for buying property with Don's money and putting them in her own name. Ultimately, she had embezzled about $600,000, and the court required that McQueen had to give back all of that money to Don.
On June 12, 1997, Wendell Williams called Don and told him that Carole was getting Don's things removed from the property. Because of this, Don filed a domestic violence injunction against Carole. The injunction included a written statement by Don that said, quote, "This is the second time Carole has gotten angry enough to threaten to kill me. I was away from her house. She gave 2 junk men permission to come on the property and remove trucks and equipment that I had stored there that a man owed me $17,000 on. When I found out, the man that owned the equipment had to call the sheriff to make them stop. When I got back, me and Carole got in a big fuss. She ordered me out of the house or she would kill me, and if I came back, she would kill me." End quote. He also mentioned that Carole owned a .45 revolver and that she had stolen Don's .357. Don was trying to get a restraining order against Carole, but under Florida law, only very specific circumstances merit a restraining order, and this situation didn't meet the requirements, so it was denied. Carole believed that Wendell was manipulating Don into making the report, taking advantage of Don's weaker mental state, and she believed that Don was just mad because she was getting rid of his junk and that he placed more value on it than there actually was. She thought it was actually basically worthless and that he was just holding on to things because he couldn't understand the business aspect of it anymore. Wendell, on the other hand, believed that Carole was just trying to tarnish Don's character and that she was the one manipulating Don. So there was a lot of back and forth with this. Around this time, Don told several people in his life he was in danger, but didn't say from who. On August 18th, 1997, according to Carole, Don told her that he was going to leave really, really early in the morning. He left around 6 a.m. and dropped off real estate signs to his lawyer. No one witnessed him dropping off the signs, but they were there where they were supposed to be, so it's believed that he did do that. However, he was not seen again after this. Don's ex-wife and his daughters pushed Carole to report him missing, but she wasn't really sure she should. He was well known to leave for days on end with no contact while he was in Costa Rica, so it really wasn't unheard of or even out of the normal for him to do this.
I think this is a really important statement as well, because a lot of people say that that's one of the reasons Carole is guilty, because she didn't want to report him missing immediately. But we have to consider all of the circumstances. Like when you're looking at statistics, you have to look at all of the statistics and you have to look at all the numbers rather than just what someone's providing for you. And so I think it's important to note that the reason she didn't think it was important is because this wasn't abnormal.
And remember, their marriage was a little bit rocky. She knew he had affairs. He was gone all the time to Costa Rica. So yeah, when you really consider all the circumstances together, it's not that abnormal. Around August 22nd, Don's car was found abandoned at the Pilot Country Airport. His keys and briefcase were still in the car, and the flight logs were checked, but there was no record of him flying or boarding a flight. But again, this wasn't really that abnormal for Don. He had lost his pilot's license, so sometimes he would take a plane and fly under the radar to avoid detection so he didn't have to log his flights. So it didn't necessarily mean that he hadn't gone somewhere. Police started looking more into the case and allegedly found that Dawn's safe deposit box was emptied of $200,000. Investigators decided to polygraph the family, but Carole refused to be polygraphed twice on the suggestion of her lawyer. Dawn had allegedly given documents like his will, power of attorney, and a copy of the injunction against Carole to Anne McQueen and told her to take it to the police if something happened to him. She apparently forgot about this until September, which is kind of strange to me. You would think if your boss goes missing and told you to do something if he disappeared that you would immediately remember that. But she forgot, and by the time she remembered, she claims that Carole had stolen the documents from her office and had come up with new documents. These new documents have garnered a lot of controversy over if they're real or not, if the witness signature is real, if Dawn's signature is real, and if Dawn even had a hand in creating them at all. In these new documents, Carole was named executor and given power of attorney. The inclusion of the word disappearance in the power of attorney has been a source of a lot of suspicion as well, but Carole stated it was because Dawn talked about people going missing in Costa Rica a lot, so it was just a natural progression for her.
5 years after his disappearance, Don Lewis was officially declared deceased. The death date was recorded as August 19th, 2002, even though the actual date and cause of death and location of the body were all still unknown. In 2020, the records that Carole had provided many years prior regarding the power of attorney were all deemed forged. Many experts and the sheriff all supported this statement, but the statute of limitations had already reached its resolution a while ago, so there was nothing that could be done.
Which I think is kind of an interesting aspect too, because at first the witness swore up and down that everything was legitimate and that they were there and they saw it and all this stuff. And then right after the statute of limitations ran out is when it sort of all became raised as an issue. So it's sort of convenient timing for the people involved. And I just think that's kind of interesting.
Also, we have a little image of his normal signature versus the signature that was on the sheet. And me being an untrained person looks at it and it looks like it was traced, like someone was struggling to make certain curves or match up certain things. So we'll have that on our website if you want to check it out. But it is a little suspicious, and I am surprised and shocked that a professional didn't acknowledge that that wasn't normal right on the spot.
But at the same time, if Carole's story is true, Dawn's mental state was declining rapidly, and that could have manifested in physical ways too. So I think someone's signature changing over time or becoming a little bit more unsteady with declining health isn't that abnormal. So it could go either way in a lot of directions.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't even think about how his mental health could have a factor into his handwriting. Also this year, an investigative reporter named Jerry Mitchell started looking into the disappearance of Don Lewis. Jerry Mitchell assisted in breaking open a lot of different cases, such as the civil rights murder of Medgar Evers, and even more recently, a killer named Felix Vile. With so many people involved and stories intertwined and suspicious circumstances, there are many theories swirling around this case. After doing some research, it's easy to see that people attack Carole Baskin. Brittany, our amazing little sleuth, infiltrated something for the first time on this podcast. So she was able to infiltrate a Facebook group that just kind of bashes Carole. She had to lie a little bit on the entry questions and say like, yes, she's guilty. Yes, she's an awful person. Or else they just wouldn't accept you if you like speculated her guilt. This is honestly a very narrow-minded aspect on the case. You have to look at everything as a whole. And when you do that, some things just aren't aligning properly, or there's so many other theories that you can't just get your mind set on one specific theory without fully analyzing all the others. They critique every move she makes, absolutely everything, and they blame everything on Carole Baskin. She's called a hypocrite because she once bred cats, but it's just important to see how she's changed as well, and that she's learned that it's harmful and she doesn't do that anymore that we're aware of. They even addressed the animals she buys, saying that they were well cared for and she just kind of took them and lied about their health. And Carole did claim to buy a tiger that was in bad condition from its owner, Dennis Hill. In contrast, Dennis came back and said that the tiger was actually treated really well, much like a house cat. At this point, it is kind of like his word against hers, he said, she said, but neither of them seem to be extremely credible, so who can really tell? Does this mean that Carole Baskin is flawless? Absolutely not. And it doesn't mean that she's innocent either. We don't know. We aren't Carole Baskin. We aren't Dawn. We don't know what happened in this situation. But it also doesn't mean that she's guilty, and that's something that we need to keep in mind.
Yeah, people are very quick to throw a lot of hate at Carole Baskin, and some facts of the case are interesting and should be talked about, but oftentimes that's kind of overshadowed by people just attacking her character or her appearance or the way she talks and just stuff that has nothing to do with it. And I think the more that you focus on that, the less credibility you have as someone actually investigating the case if you just hate her because of the documentary or whatever like that, or if you just listen to all the hate and just accept that without looking into it yourself. It can be easy to look at her as a bad person, but it's really important to focus on the facts and not just bash her for no reason.
And it's important to see, as we've talked about in this case, that yeah, Carole did some shady stuff here and there, but so did Dawn, so did Anne McQueen, so did Dawn's friends. He was wrapped up in really shady businesses. He had mistresses. So it's important to acknowledge that she's not the only suspicious character in this case. There is also speculation out there that Carole is using the rescue facility as a cover-up for a private collection that she has, since her finances don't really add up. However, these assumptions aren't completely accurate. It was noted that Carole made about $40 million since Big Cat Rescue has been open, but she only spent $10 million on animal care and education. This obviously means something suspicious is going on, right? Well, maybe not really. The calculations leave out construction, maintenance, conservation efforts, legalities, employee payments, bills, and the donated vet care and help. There may still be some money left over, but we should consider all of the finances associated with keeping up such a large facility before making such accusations. There may be people out there who have done full calculations and still think that she's shady, but we couldn't really find anything in our research to show those calculations. Some further speculations are that Carole may not know what happened to Don, but that she was involved with some of his shady dealings, which is why she was weird about releasing some of her records.
I think that theory definitely could be true. She probably knew a lot more than anybody else did about the things he was doing, and even if she didn't have anything to do with his disappearance, she probably wouldn't want her lifestyle and the things she owned to just come under fire. So it wouldn't surprise me if after Dawn disappeared, they weren't like getting along that well, and he was planning to leave and she was doing her own thing kind of. So it's not that outlandish that she wasn't crazy broken up about him leaving and just was more concerned about her finances, her future, the animals, and things like that. So definitely could be.
One primary theory we discussed is that Carole killed Dawn. This seems to be an overarching theory that a lot of people are leaning on. And she did mention in an earlier letter that we read to Gladys that she had thought about killing her previous husband, Michael. Would it be out of the ordinary for her to think about it again? Definitely knowing all the trouble that Don seemed to cause with his affairs and his business dealings and periods of absence while he traveled and prior family drama, it all could really be straining their marriage. But was this enough for her to kill him?
Don's daughter, Donna, was the first to accuse Carole of putting Don through the meat grinder. That was a hugely popular theory throughout the show. So there's a lot of speculation on the internet about this. One interesting take came from YouTuber Ripper Jack Media. He interviewed a woman named Patricia, who was the wife of Kenneth Farr. Kenneth worked for Don and Carole. Carole even mentioned on her website that she viewed him as a son, and he was very close with the family, helping them out and doing sort of handyman work. Patricia claimed that the day that Don went missing, Kenneth came home with one of his friends in Don's van, and it was full of guns. Apparently, Kenneth told Patricia that Don was missing, but not to talk about it at all. This is the same van that was later found at the airport, and Kenneth was allegedly acting super erratic at this time and turned more violent. Eventually, in the year 2000, Kenneth held his wife and children at gunpoint, and Patricia fled. This was the final straw for her. The marriage had not been good, so she took the kids and she ran and never looked back. After this incident, Patricia turned over the guns and some documents that she had kind of relating to the situation with Don over to the police. What's more, Patricia claims that Kenneth admitted to putting Don through the meat grinder and threatened her with the same fate. Kenneth had a relatively lengthy criminal record, but according to him, Don told him that he had something big brewing and that if he pulled this thing off, that it would be the best thing he'd ever done. Kenneth also reported that Don would bury gold and cash around the property, which is pretty classic drug dealer behavior. So it's really hard to tell in this situation. Is Kenneth trying to throw suspicion off of himself onto Don with shady dealings, or does Kenneth have more to do with it than we think, or is he the one that actually killed Don? It's a lot of speculation around that. Depending on his involvement, Kenneth becomes less reliable with things that he's saying, so you have to take all of that with a grain of salt. Also, Patricia's account, she's fled from this abusive marriage, so she may have reason to kind of want Kenneth to be punished. So it's hard to know who to trust in this story because everyone seems to sort of have their own motives for sharing information. But back to the meat grinder. Carole claims that it was a small hand crank meat grinder, and not only that, but it had been removed from the property weeks before Don's death. This seems to have been confirmed by the police, but Patricia and others say that it was actually a huge commercial meat grinder and that it was still there when Don went missing. So that's another one of those things that there's a lot of speculation surrounding it, and it's hard to tell without concrete documents saying one way or the other.
So we discussed some of the well thought out larger theories, but there are also plenty of small scale theories that could be just as accurate. One theory involved the idea that Carole had Don killed by a hitman or an acquaintance. Clearly, Don was mixed up with some really fishy businesses, and Carole probably was as well, so she most likely had the same connections and finances to get a job done. Unfortunately, there's not enough evidence to support this theory. It's just a speculation. In reference to their shady connections through business, there is also the possibility that he was killed by a business acquaintance. He was involved in drug dealings, and it wouldn't be out of the normal for him to be killed by a cartel. Furthermore, Don Lewis could have faked his death and ran away if he knew that his life was in danger, or if he just wanted to get out of the chaos that he had become involved in. This wouldn't be out of the ordinary for people who have dealt with illegal business dealings. Also, he wasn't very happy in his marriage, and he had withdrawn those $200,000 from his safety box, and he had already shipped a lot of his belongings to Costa Rica. So it seems to be a really perfect setup for that.
Yeah, it could have been a very clean break for him. And I think this theory holds a lot of water. I think even if he intended to run away and then, showed this huge sum of cash to the wrong person or something like that, and they just sort of disappeared him.
Or he could have been trying to run away, and in the process of running away from some of these businessmen, they realized what he was doing and found him and ended him right there because they didn't want to lose their money, and they didn't want someone just disappearing on them and taking what they were owed. Don Lewis was also known for having many, many mistresses over his years, which is a lot of people to piss off. Therefore, another theory is that a mistress or the spouse of a mistress finished him off for revenge. Crimes of passion are so common, and he was involved in multiple situations where this could occur. With people that he made angry, it is also speculated that his son or his assistant Anne McQueen killed him. The reason his son stands out as a possibility is because it was mentioned by Officer Chronister.
And in the documentary, Anne McQueen mentioned being the only other person that the police seriously considered as a suspect. So I think that tells you something right there.
A final theory which seems plausible is that something happened on his plane ride to Costa Rica. Either the plane went down and Don didn't survive, or someone killed him en route. He may have flown under the radar, so if the plane crashed or something happened, it doesn't necessarily mean that it would have gotten reported or seen by officials in any sort of way. Specifically, a man named Joe Fritz had something to say about this theory. Joe Fritz was labeled in Tiger King as Don's attorney, but Carole claims that he was actually Anne McQueen's attorney, and as we know, Anne and Don were super close before the embezzlement problem, so it wouldn't surprise me if he kind of talked on his behalf. Either way, he was really involved with Carole as well. When Joe was asked what he believed happened to Don, he gave a chillingly detailed response. Joe said, quote, "What I had heard was that he was strangled from the back seat of an airplane over the Gulf of Mexico at 50 feet and dropped out over the Gulf." End quote. So, yeah, there's another theory.
It's just such a strange statement to me. You ask what happened and someone gives you an exact like measurement of the feet that he was dropped out over the Gulf. Like,
Exactly. Like that just, I have the image of this plane like basically hovering over the Gulf of Mexico water, and he got strangled from the back seat. Like not just like strangled and tossed off. Like he specified where on the plane, where they were, over what body of water, how far from the body of water. Like it just way too much details for my comfortability.
Yeah.
Is that a word?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like if someone asked you that, he might have said, oh, I think he was murdered, or I think that, you know, so-and-so had something to do with it. But to be that specific is very suspicious
Yeah,
to me.
even just saying like an accident may have happened on the plane, like that would have been enough.
But yeah, I think the most likely theory is that his business dealings caught up with him, especially if he was kind of losing his mental acuity, that someone might have manipulated him or just seen him as an easy target. And I think the most likely theory is that that just eventually caught up to him, and whether it happened in Costa Rica or they just sort of took him off the streets, or if he was in the process of running away, something like that, I think that's plausible. But there's just so many people that had a problem with Don. I think that there's just a lot of theories on what could have happened that are very plausible.
And you go back to those 350 properties that they accumulated way at the beginning. Think about all the people he made mad when he took their property and when like sold it. He made these people essentially homeless.
Yeah, and people have killed for a lot less than that.
Personally, I have no idea what happened to Dawn. I think Carole Baskin could be guilty, but I also think that she really could be innocent. I don't trust anybody in this whole case. Everyone, even the attorneys and everyone, they just seem so fishy to me, to be pretty stingy and greedy, and he didn't really have respect for the women he was with. I feel like he probably made so many people upset that him trying to run away, maybe even fake his death, probably sounds like a reasonable theory to me. But I also think that he could easily be dead now with all the underground dealings he was doing and what he was involved in. Not even just that, but the mistresses. Like there's just so much going on. It's such a hefty case that it's hard to really pick a path that you think may be the right answer. There's many plausible theories that we could go off on because of the way he lived his life and the people that he surrounded himself with.
Definitely a wild one, and I think it's super important to remember that documentaries, especially sensationalized ones like Tiger King, are very, very biased. They only give you a small portion of the information, and they really present it in a way that is intended to make you feel a certain way about the characters. I think the amount of people that have looked at that documentary and idolized Joe Exotic and other super awful people in the show just shows you how easy it is to manipulate people into becoming a fan of just someone terrible.
Honestly, I mean, people were crazy about Joe Exotic and even still are, and he tried to kill someone, and he was very much mistreating animals, and he was preying on young men and forcing them into this marriage that they didn't even want to be in, to where one of them even committed suicide. So it's very important to not just go with the attitude of a documentary, and this goes across the board for any documentary, not just true crime ones. They all have some sense of bias in them.
So take it as a jumping off point if you're very interested in the case, and definitely do your own research and look more into it. Don't just trust the documentary, if you can even call it that, honestly. I feel like Tiger King was kind of less of a documentary and more of just like a sensationalized show for entertainment, not information. But a lot of people have taken it as the truth and haven't looked any further and just attack Carole. It's become such a huge thing just to attack her for no reason and to joke about it. So whether she did it or didn't do it, that's not the kind of thing that's going to find the truth. So that wraps up this episode. It's definitely a wild one, and it's really interesting covering a case that has so much speculation and so much emotion running through it, I guess. But we hope that you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Give us a 5-star rating. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook so you get all the updates on the cases we cover and other things we find interesting. If you'd like to support the show, we'll have the link for our Patreon on our website, theabysspod.com. We will talk to you again in a couple weeks.
Thanks for diving into the abyss with us.
Bye.
Like, you can't be doing that.
Just
I'm Paul. Oh, God. That little one-eyed cyclops monkey or something. Oh, no, he had 3 eyes. Who was... Where did I pull out domestic? Domestic proof.
On the other hand, he was also known to have lards.
They testified with their mutter. They testified with their mutter. I don't trust anybody.
I don't trust anyone.
I don't trust anyone.